A firm hand suddenly grabbed the girl's wrist tightly, as if trying to hold onto one last chance in the dead of night. Standing under the dim streetlight, the stranger looked straight into Ryun's eyes and boldly proposed that the two of them carry out a crazy plan together. Jinriyeon was stunned to hear the other person casually suggest that the two of them should get married immediately. He flashed a confident smile, asserting that moving in together was the only key to smoothly resolving all the current troubles. Witnessing the absurd scene right before his eyes, the boyfriend standing nearby could only stammer in shock, not understanding what was going on. He panicked and called out Ryun's name, repeatedly demanding to know why she remained silent without reacting to the stranger's proposal. The boyfriend tried hard to convince her to reject him and told her to yell right in the other guy's face that the proposal was completely ridiculous. But Ryun just stood rooted to the spot as she heard him assert his position as her boyfriend, her mind in turmoil wondering why things had come to this. Watching her lover's silhouette gradually drift apart, Ryun bitterly thought to herself that she too had once firmly believed her future husband would be him. Right at this moment, an MBS News broadcast suddenly blared, loudly announcing the identity of the person who had just hit the jackpot in the couple's housing lottery. The MBS News prominently reported on an apartment in Seoul with an unbelievably cheap price tag of just around 500 million won. This was the golden opportunity millions craved, having to overcome terrible odds of up to 1 in 2 million. The clinking of glasses rang clearly in the lively atmosphere as friends unanimously congratulated Jinriyeon on her rare stroke of luck. Everyone excitedly gathered around the dining table, joking that the new jackpot winner absolutely had to treat the whole group today. However, Ryun took a small sip of beer with a sad look on her face as she revealed her fear of almost having to give up the apartment due to not being able to get a loan. She recalled the time when she and Hyuk-jae went to the bank full of hope to ask about loan procedures before everything went south. At the teller counter, the female clerk gave a professional smile, but then started bringing up the difficulties caused by her being a freelancer. The faces of Ryun and her boyfriend suddenly turned pale upon hearing the announcement that the loan application under her name was completely ineligible for approval. Desperate at the risk of losing her life-changing chance, she urgently pleaded for another solution while the bank employee thoughtfully weighed the options. The atmosphere suddenly shifted when the employee asked if the two of them were married, and Ryun hastily confirmed they were planning a wedding to untie the final knot. That changes everything. The clerk says that since Hyuk-jae has a stable office job, they can register for a joint loan. It's a massive relief. Not only is the loan approved, but they'll also get a better interest rate for newlyweds. Back in the present, Ryun realizes that without Hyuk-jae, she would have had to walk away from her dream home. Daim and their friends toast to the happy ending, glad that everything worked out for her. Across the table, Kim Uisin watches the group silently while taking a drink. One of the guys turns to him, teasing that he should stop renting and find someone to marry already. Hyuk-jae leans in, bragging about how he's finally going to have his own house, even if the bank technically owns it. He looks at Ryun while joking that being single doesn't really help anyone out in this city. Uisin just gives a small smile and says he's perfectly fine with his life exactly as it is. The focus shifts to the other side of the table, where Daim starts aggressively stuffing snacks into a friend's mouth. Amidst the boisterous laughter and chatter, everyone competed to serve food to the friend sitting opposite them, making the atmosphere even more lively. Suddenly called by name, Jinriyeon looked up, her face still radiant from the conversation. The male friend sitting across from her smiled kindly, formally sending his best wishes for her upcoming marriage. Ryun gave a soft, contented smile, her eyes sparkling with joy as she nodded in response to that meaningful wish. The party ended. The city streets had been lit up for a while, and a waiting taxi by the porch signaled the end of a turbulent day. Ryun's staggering footsteps imprinted on the road, showing that the drunkenness had begun to seep deeply into the young girl's mind. Despite her friend's earnest advice to go home early, she stubbornly insisted that she still had tons of important things to take care of personally. She smiled cheerfully with a carefree look, declaring that if things went south, she would just crash at Hyuk-jae's place for convenience. Ryun stood by the street waving goodbye, reminding her friend in the taxi to get home safely. Finally, she walked silently into the night, staring at her phone screen while agonizing over the troubles waiting for her ahead. She scrolls through a long digital to-do list, filled with everything from dress fittings to furniture budgets. As she heads for the building, she decides that getting her dress tour scheduled is the most urgent thing on the list. Riyeon walks up the stairs, haunted by a single choice. If she hadn't decided to drop by his house that day, she wonders if the future they promised would still be intact. She punches the code into the lock. The door swings open, and she finds Hyukji standing there, shirtless and looking like he's seen a ghost. Riyeon freezes, the realization of what's happening hitting her all at once. Hyukji can barely get her name out, his face pale, as he tries to process that he's been caught. He starts to stammer an excuse, but it's impossible to ignore the person hiding under the covers behind him. Riyeon's eyes drop to the entryway, where a pair of pink high heels sits among the other shoes. She doesn't say a word, spinning around and bolting out of the apartment as fast as she can. She tears down the hallway, the sound of her own footsteps echoing in the quiet building. Meanwhile, Daim and another friend are lounging on a sofa, casually talking about how they'd handle a cheater. They're watching a drama on TV where a woman is running away, and they both agree that just walking away is way too easy on the guy. Back on the street, Riyeon is walking in a daze when her bag slips off her shoulder and hits the pavement. She doesn't even stop to pick it up, her mind too far gone to care about her belongings. She stops in the middle of the sidewalk, realizing she isn't actually as strong as those characters on TV. She buries her face in her hands, the weight of the betrayal finally starting to crush her. She lets out a shaky breath, surprised that she isn't even crying. Maybe this is just what being an adult feels like. She starts walking again, her thoughts spinning as she tries to figure out her next move. Every detail of their upcoming wedding flashes through her head, from the venue they already booked to the guests they invited. She doubles back to grab her bag, but the practicalities of the situation are already haunting her. The apartment, the loan, the planner. She stands there, hating herself for worrying about real estate and finances while her heart is being ripped out. A vision of a perfect wedding flashes before her eyes, the music swelling as the bride prepares to walk down the aisle. The bride looks radiant, but there's a sense of irony in the scene that Riyeon couldn't have seen coming. As the camera pans down the aisle, the groom waits at the end, ready to start a new life. A hand reaches out to welcome the bride, but it's not the hand of the man she expected to see there. Instead, Kim Uisin stands at the altar, smiling at her with a warmth that feels like a dream. The sound of a synth note cuts through the vision, pulling her back to the harsh reality of her studio. She's slumped over her keyboard, agonizing over why he had to do this right when everything was finally falling into place. From the doorway, Daim catches her mid-rant, listening as Riyeon curses out the man she was supposed to marry. Jinriyeon startled and turned around with a bewildered face when unexpectedly pressed about the progress of completing the melody for the new song. Leaning against the door, Daim anxiously observed her friend's somewhat pale face and advised her to go outside for some fresh air if she was stuck. Immediately, Riyeon excitedly demanded to go right away despite Daim still being dumbfounded, not understanding why she reacted so quickly. Daim's eyes were filled with doubt as she looked at her friend's back, secretly certain that Riyeon had not been thinking about music at all just now. The young girl could only give a forced, wry smile to hide the truth that her mind was actually in complete turmoil because of other matters. A carton of chocolate milk and a bottle of hangover recovery drink lay quietly on the table as an inevitable preparation for a sluggish morning. Riyeon tiredly reached for the bottle with an unconvinced look, silently lamenting her own miserable situation at this moment. Slumping under the umbrella on the porch, she wearily admitted to Daim that she had turned to alcohol again last night and doubted the saving power of chocolate milk. The two of them sank into the quiet emptiness of the early morning, letting trivial thoughts surround their minds amidst the silent space. Suddenly, Riyeon spoke up to tell Daim about a friend who had just been painfully betrayed by her lover right in the middle of the busy preparations for their wedding. She asks if the friend should call it off, and Daim doesn't hesitate. The answer is an immediate yes. Daim mentions that Riyeon's own wedding is coming up soon, and Riyeon can feel her heart skip a beat. Daim is firm, insisting that the friend needs to end it now, while Riyeon stammers about how everyone her age is getting married anyway. But Daim shuts that down quickly, stating that cheating is a habit that never truly goes away. Daim leans back with a sigh, her verdict clear. A guy who cheats while wedding planning is nothing but absolute trash. Riyeon tries to offer a counterpoint, reminding her that adult life is messy and full of complications like housing loans and cancellation fees. Doim isn't swayed, holding up her fingers as she calculates the long life Rion's friend still has ahead of her. To Doim, the idea of sacrificing the next 65 years just to save a bit of money sounds completely insane. She stands up with sudden energy, urging Rion to tell her friend to cut ties immediately and consider this a bullet dodged. Rion looks on, silent, as Daim points out that while a broken engagement is just a memory, a divorce stays on your record forever. Once she's alone, the weight of the conversation settles on Rion's shoulders, her expression filled with a quiet, aching sadness. She pulls out her phone and stares at her favorites list before finally tapping on the name Yoo Hyuk-ji. Standing alone outside a building at night, she listens to the phone ring, thinking about how the whole point of marriage was supposed to be happiness. When he finally answers, Rion doesn't waste any time, her voice steady as she tells him they need to break up. The silence on the other end is deafening as she stands there, a small, isolated figure against the cold stone wall. Her patience wears thin as the silence stretches on, and she demands to know why he's refusing to speak yet again. Frustration boils over into a shout as she begs him to say something, anything, instead of retreating into his usual habits. She knows exactly what he's doing. It's the same pattern of shutting down completely whenever he feels cornered. Her mind drifts back to their past arguments, the word avoidance flashing like a warning sign they both ignored. In her memory, she's pleading with him, unable to understand how he can spend hours on games, but can't find a second to text her back. Hyuk-ji just looks away in the flashback, his refusal to engage leaving her more isolated than if he had actually fought back. She remembers clutching her head in despair, begging him to stop acting in a way that makes her feel like some obsessive stalker. The memories are bitter, like the time she caught him sneaking off to a hostess club and asked to see his phone for proof. He had turned it around on her then, calling her a quest for transparency, obsessive, to deflect from his own betrayal. She realizes now that he was always just waiting for her to make a mistake, so he could use it to justify his own behavior. The flashback shows her finally breaking, running away down the street as the distance between them becomes a physical reality. She had even dropped her bag in her haste to escape, but she didn't look back, her only thought to get away from him. Back in the present, she stands on the dark street, the realization hitting her that he never once tried to come after her. It wouldn't have been a long run, and he's faster than she is, yet he chose to let her walk away without a word. She had hoped for at least a gesture, an attempt to explain himself, but the silence on the phone tells her everything she needs to know. Suddenly, another voice filters through the line, a colleague at his office asking if he's ready for lunch. Hyuk-ji answers the colleague with a cheerful, easy smile, his tone completely different from the one he uses with her. He continues the casual conversation, even asking about their lunch plans, as if he isn't in the middle of a life-altering phone call. The line goes dead with a final click, leaving Rion staring at her screen in a state of total, numbing shock. A moment later, the shock turns into a roar of disbelief as she shouts at the phone, unable to believe his utter lack of basic courtesy. With a sharp motion, she hangs up for good, the fire in her eyes suggesting that something inside her has finally snapped. Later, Rion stands outside the Nara Bank, her jaw set with a new, fierce determination to take control of her own life. Inside, the sound of keys clacking fills the air as a bank employee begins processing her information. The employee goes through the formalities, asking about Rion's work as a composer and whether she has a business license. When Rion admits she doesn't, the employee's expression turns sympathetic, explaining that loan requirements have become much stricter. She lays out the harsh reality. Without a business license or being part of a major insurance program, securing a mortgage is almost impossible. As a last resort, the employee suggests using a husband's credentials if she's getting married soon, but Rion's answer is a hollow no. Rion listens as the employee continues to talk about timelines, but her mind is already elsewhere as she prepares to leave. Walking away from the counter, she wonders if her only option left is to lease out the house, though that leaves her with nowhere to go. She sighs heavily as she exits, worrying that nobody would even want to lease a house that's already buried under a mortgage. Lost in her own thoughts, She's startled out of her daze when a voice suddenly calls out her name. Ryeon's eyes widen in surprise as she realizes the person calling her name is none other than Kim Uisin. Ryeon asks what brought him there, and Uisin explains that he's looking for a jaunt's lease after his landlord raised the rent. As they walk, Uisin admits that finding a place is tough due to high deposits and the constant threat of housing scams. Ryeon suggests government youth housing, but Uisin laughs it off, doubtfully explaining that his family situation makes him ineligible. He then turns the question on her, wondering what has her visiting the bank today. With a gentle smile, he asks if she's still getting married soon, assuming she won't have to worry about loans much longer. The reminder of her engagement causes Ryeon's expression to crumble, the pain of the past few days etched clearly on her face. Standing outside the bank entrance, she quietly admits to him that the wedding likely won't be happening at all. The news clearly shocks Uisin, his casual demeanor vanishing as he takes in her pained expression. He tentatively asks if it was just a major argument, suggesting that perhaps they just need to sit down and talk it out. Ryeon gives a small, sad smile and looks down, telling him that a conversation wouldn't be enough to fix things. She clarifies that the breakup is probably for good, her voice sounding tired and resigned to the situation. Uisin starts to ask if she's really alright, but Ryeon cuts him off with a sudden, determined craving for caffeine. She forces a bright, cheerful smile and asks if Uisin wants to come along to grab a coffee. Uisin offers a soft, understanding smile in return and agrees to accompany her. They head to a nearby shop, and soon Ryeon is thanking the barista as she's handed 2 iced coffees. Uisin hands one of the drinks to her as they step back onto the sidewalk, his gesture simple and kind. They walk side by side through the evening crowd, the cold coffee providing a welcome distraction from their earlier conversation. Ryeon finally breaks the silence, beginning to say something as Uisin turns his attention fully toward her. The young man suggested that he would explain everything soon, while also hoping Ryeon wouldn't reveal anything to Salmon and Hung at this moment. Ryeon gave a slight nod of agreement, saying she still hadn't sorted out her chaotic thoughts and promised to explain everything clearly when she was truly ready. His eyes suddenly became filled with guilt as he looked at her, then softly uttered a sincere apology that made the space instantly fall silent. Watching his every step, the girl silently wondered what exactly he felt sorry for when she was the one who was confused. The young man suddenly stopped, asserting in a low voice that since this was an extremely important matter, he didn't want to rush her. He asked her to just take her time to consider it carefully, and only let him know when she felt truly comfortable. Right under the magnolia canopy, he quietly knelt down to retie her shoelaces, not forgetting to encourage her that she would overcome everything. After finishing the knot, he looked up at her with a warm smile and gently announced that everything was all set. Ryeon was stunned by his gentle gesture, only managing to stammer a confirmation that her shoelaces had indeed come undone earlier. Their feet rhythmically strolled alongside each other again, opening a new journey where they would face all the upcoming storms together. Ever since their university days, Kim Uisin had always maintained that heart-melting gentleness and thoughtfulness. Back then, she was often clumsy, so he never hesitated to kneel in the middle of the schoolyard to carefully and tenderly retie Ryeon's shoelaces. Looking at the young man in front of her, Ryeon secretly thought that she absolutely had to use him as the standard control group to evaluate other men. Seeing his bewildered look, she smiled and said that even though he was a bit boring, if any of her friends ever dated him, she would fully support them. Uisin shyly asked back if that was a compliment, and immediately received a firm nod of confirmation from Ryeon. She took his hand and joked that best friends dating each other sounded a bit weird, so he was the most perfect role model for her to use for comparisons. She boldly declared that if she later married someone even sweeter than him, then that marriage would surely be a resounding success. While he attentively adjusted her collar, Ryeon suddenly smiled, remembering the brilliant youth when she had once boldly spoken those naive words. But then reality struck, making her question her own heart as to why she had ever intended to walk down the aisle with Hyukjae. Faced with Uisin's sincerity, Ryeon's mind was now flooded with reasons why she shouldn't marry an uncaring jerk like her current lover. The solitary streetlight illuminated a quiet corner of the night street, where hidden secrets were about to be exposed under the witness of time. At the dinner table full of food, The atmosphere suddenly became lively as old memories began to be excitedly brought up by the group of friends. A friend passionately recounted the night Ryun frantically ran to the duty room with a panicked face, making everyone unable to hold back their laughter. He continued to tease her about her crazy journey of going to every veterinary clinic just to save a deer that was in an accident. Despite the other person laughing uncontrollably when mentioning she had to borrow a whole truck to transport the poor animal, Ryun could only close her eyes and sigh in embarrassment. The story abruptly paused when a friend seriously called her name and reminded her of the important things she had promised to share with everyone. Jinriyeon hesitantly looked at her two friends who were anxiously waiting. She gathered all her courage to start opening up about the harsh truth regarding her wedding. She was determined to recount the whole incident from the beginning, starting with the congratulatory party that day and how she had gone to Hyuk-jae's house. The atmosphere was dropping when the phone suddenly vibrated vigorously with an incoming call from the name Hyuk-jae, which was once so sweetly attached. Without letting it ring for too long, Ryun decisively slammed her hand on the screen to mute it. Her state of mind right now was nothing but extreme outrage for the unfaithful man. The two friends were stunned to see Ryun hang up so ruthlessly and curiously asked if that was a call from her boyfriend. Ryun casually gave a forced smile, saying that everything was fine and intending to continue her unfinished story. She tried to appear calm while mentioning an incident that happened between her and Hyuk-jae, while the silhouette of that man had already loomed right behind her. Witnessing the unexpected presence of the story's main character, the friends could only gasp in sheer astonishment. Ryun confusingly turned her head toward the entrance, unable to hide her surprise upon realizing an acquaintance had just stepped into the pub. Hyuk-jae stood there with a cold expression, calling her name and asserting that he had guessed for sure she would hide in this place. Facing the question of how he found the address, he sarcastically asked back if there was anywhere else for her to drink every day besides this pub. Ryun narrowed her eyes in anger, hearing him question the reason for not answering the phone and declaring that he had seen everything. She immediately fired back that he was no better, causing a frustrated Hyuk-jae to demand she step outside to resolve it privately. Ryun's face tensed up with resentment at hearing the request to go out and talk from the jerk who had just caused so much trouble in her life. Hyuk-jae dropped the announcement that he would wait for her outside, then decisively left, making the atmosphere suddenly suffocating. Uisin still quietly observed Ryun with deeply concerned eyes, seemingly trying his best to suppress the emotions swirling inside his heart. Ryun slammed her hand on the table to calm herself down, then softly said she would be right back, her face clearly showing an unyielding determination. She decisively pushed the door and stepped outside, leaving her friends still dumbfounded by the sudden change in the person who was just joyful a moment ago. Uisin bowed his head in deep thought, making the friend sitting next to him unable to help but feel suspicious. They kept pressing him on whether the two had just had a fierce argument. He suddenly stood up and announced he also needed to go out for a bit, making Salman hastily ask if he was planning to go look for Ryun. Uisin gave a forced smile to dispel the tense atmosphere, saying he only wanted to go behind the pub to find a place to smoke and clear his mind. He gave a slight wave and told everyone to keep enjoying the party, then quietly walked away under the suspicious gazes of his close friends. The atmosphere at the dinner table was left with only melancholic sighs. They looked at each other with deep concern, realizing the tension engulfing everything. Standing outside under the dim streetlight, the man was already waiting with a pensive look, as if preparing for an inevitable confrontation. Standing silently under the nightlight, Uisin lit a cigarette and accidentally overheard Ryun yelling a demand to end this relationship immediately. Hyuk-jae looked at her with furious eyes. He snapped and asked if he looked stupid enough in her eyes to be treated like that. Faced with his excuse that he had never humiliated her, Ryun harshly retorted that him forcing a marriage after his betrayal was exactly treating her like a fool. He still stubbornly followed her to clarify that it was just a misunderstanding, loudly asserting that he had no intention of cheating. Ryun stopped dead in her tracks in the middle of the dark alley, shouting right in his face, asking what kind of misunderstanding involves two people naked together, and demanding a satisfactory explanation. Faced with her sharp questioning, Hyuk-jae could only bow his head to the ground, completely mute and unable to utter a word. Looking at that cowardly demeanor, Ryun sarcastically sneered that he was staying silent only because he was at a disadvantage and couldn't argue anymore. She furiously asserted that if he was someone with a sense of shame, he should at least apologize or find a way to explain that filthy situation that day. With eyes as cold as ice, she boldly declared that she would officially cancel the entire planned wedding. Hyuk-jae shockingly tore at his hair. He stammered, asking her back if she knew that she herself would be the one suffering the greatest loss if she called off the wedding right now. Hyuk-jae pressured Ryun under the streetlight with economic cost-benefit calculations, reminding her of the home loan debt and the fact that she had already decided to leave her old place. The young woman could only listen in silence as her treacherous boyfriend analyzed that even if she sublet the apartment, there wasn't enough time left for her to find another way out. Hyuk-jae let out a long, exhausted sigh, then lowered his voice to assert that he would honestly lay everything bare, only hoping she would give him another chance. He continued to dig deep into her fears by asking how she could possibly find a new place to live amidst the difficulties, when no one would be foolish enough to move into a debt-ridden house. Uisin stood dead still from afar upon hearing Hyuk-jae deliberately cover up that the incident was merely a momentary impulse before the wedding and that the two hadn't actually crossed the line. The awful man held out his hand apologetically, relentlessly coaxing Ryun to put aside her ego to reconcile and promising to tolerate all of her criticisms. Ryun's hands clenched into fists in absolute resentment as she heard him guarantee that as long as she agreed to return to his side, all financial troubles would immediately vanish. Hyuk-jae strode confidently as if he already held the victory. He painted a picture of a smooth wedding and an easy bank loan for the apartment she had just luckily won. He continuously forced her to look at the harsh reality of the wedding cancellation costs and debt pressures, using the material future to crush her already trampled self-esteem. Finally, he reached out his hand once again and whispered a proposal that the two of them think things through together like adults to find a win-win solution. A strong hand suddenly tightly gripped the girl's wrist, as if wanting to hold onto a final sliver of hope amidst the night. The man looked deeply into her wavering eyes and boldly proposed that the two of them carry out a highly risky pact together. 3 silhouettes cast long shadows under the dim streetlight, creating a suffocating atmosphere as Uisin still resolutely refused to let go of Ryun's hand. Amidst her confused mind, Ryun was astonished to hear him casually suggest that the two of them should get married right now. With a highly confident face, he asserted that moving in together was the only key to undoing all current troubles. Witnessing the unexpected drama, Hyuk-jae was stunned speechless. He could only stare at the two people in front of him with an unbelievable look. He hastily called her name and urged her to speak up, pressing to know why she remained silent in the face of a stranger's crazy proposal. He tried to remind Ryun to say no and told her to assert that those marriage proposals were truly too ridiculous. Despite Hyuk-jae ceaselessly asserting his status as the boyfriend, Ryun fell into a vast silence and silently asked herself why everything had turned out so terribly. Ryun looked at Uisin awkwardly, stammering to remind him that their relationship was originally just at the level of a long-time friendship. Kim Uisin gave a soft, warm, and meaningful smile. It seemed he had already prepared a plan to bail out his best friend. Unexpectedly, he stepped forward, tightly grabbed Ryun's hand, and decisively demanded that she follow him, leaving both her and her ex-boyfriend too stunned to react in time. Despite Hyuk-jae standing behind, constantly screaming her name and ordering her to let go of the stranger's hand and come back, Uisin kept silently pulling her along. Faced with this abrupt action, Ryun struggled to keep up while urgently telling him to let her go, pressing him on what exactly was wrong with him. He still didn't stop but explained in a low voice that he just wanted that awful jerk to taste the feeling of being abandoned because he understood the resentment she had endured for so long. Tightening his grip on her hand to pass on more strength, he asserted that he wanted that man to go crazy with helplessness too, because it would be too unfair if she were the only one heartbroken. Under the solitary streetlight, Uisin stopped abruptly and looked deeply into her eyes to firmly state that he couldn't bear to see her bearing the pain all alone. He slightly loosened his grip, then apologized for dragging her away so roughly, but admitted he truly wanted to deal a fatal psychological blow to that traitor. With a mischievous look, he began to tease that perhaps her boyfriend was furiously running over here with the intention of giving him a good punch. He closed the story with a confident smile, asserting that just making the guy live in panic even for a few brief minutes was enough to make him feel utterly satisfied. Riyun stood frozen with a dazed gaze, as if she had just realized a naked truth about the man she once loved. She bitterly confirmed that the treacherous boyfriend would never run after her to hold her back, a harsh reality that made her heart clench. Looking at the deserted street behind her, she mocked herself as she understood he had never and would never truly care about her feelings. Amidst the melancholic atmosphere, Uisin quietly held out a carton of chocolate milk, as if wanting to soothe his best friend's bleeding heart. Riyun asked in surprise if he was deliberately trying to sober her up, while pleadingly begging to drink a little alcohol to ease her sorrows. Uisin sighed in compliance and handed her a can of beer, secretly hoping its bitterness could help her relieve some of the heavy pressure. Without a hint of hesitation, Riyun immediately downed the can of beer, as if wanting to use the alcohol to drown out all the terrible memories she just went through. She dropped her head in exhaustion and let out melancholic groans, making Uisin realize she was truly suffering a severe psychological shock. In her surging resentment, she choked up and confessed that letting her group of friends witness her fiancé's affair was a humiliation hard to accept. She looked up at him with a worried look and pressed about Hong's and Salmon's reactions, fearing that they had seen all of her pathetic state. Riyun gave a slight, bitterly self-deprecating smile, mocking herself for being the most ridiculous one for once harboring the intention to save this marriage just out of a craving for a home, despite having to live with a treacherous man. Uisin silently listened to her every confession, his eyes deepening as if sharing the dead end that his best friend had to bear. He softly spoke up to ask about her next plans, worrying whether he was being too abrupt by asking about her specific plans at a time like this. Faced with his concern, Riyun forced a wry smile and admitted that right now she had no solutions at all, but she would definitely have to start finding a way to manage. Her gaze drifted far away as she confessed that in her heart she only craved to have a home of her own, so she wouldn't have to live in a precarious state anymore. She began to reminisce about the arduous journey since the early days of leaving her hometown for the city, starting a solitary life in cramped dormitory rooms. The haunting memories of a dark and damp basement room returned as a reminder of the young girl's relentless efforts over the years. The journey of moving from one tiny studio apartment to another seemed never-ending, making the desire for a place that truly belonged to her and soul increasingly burning. She confided that she had never dreamed of investing in real estate, but simply wanted to find a sense of belonging in this extravagant city. Finally, she let out an exhausted sigh of relief, then decisively raised her beer can to propose they both drink up to temporarily forget the anxieties surrounding them. Uisin observed thoughtfully, then unexpectedly asked what exactly she planned to do next after all of this. Seeing her silence, he worriedly asked if he was being too blunt in wanting to know whether she actually had any real plans yet. Riyun tried to flash a radiant smile and replied that from now on she would definitely start finding a way to manage. She slightly bowed her head, admitting how much her heart had truly longed to have that apartment. Memories rushed back from the time she was still green, starting her life in a cramped dormitory room, followed by the exhausting days of clinging on in a damp and dark basement room. She had had to move from one tiny studio apartment to another. Her life had never been truly stable. Throughout that long, endless time, she had always constantly wished for a resting place that truly belonged to her in the heart of Seoul. She secretly thought that only by having a home could she shake off the feeling that she would forever be a lost outsider. She decisively asserted that she had never cared about real estate investment, but simply wanted to have a home of her own. Riyun smiled slightly with deep bitterness, admitting she always felt jealous whenever she saw others freely playing music in their own homes. But then she reassured herself with a sigh, thinking that perhaps a real home was never meant for someone like her. To dispel the heavy atmosphere, she decisively raised her beer can and proposed that both of them just get really drunk to forget reality. The sound of the beer cans clinking amidst the silent space was like a promise to face the impending dead ends together. The bitter taste of the beer began to seep into her veins. The alcohol gradually invaded her mind, making Riyun start to feel everything around her blur. Uisin sat quietly by her side, clearly feeling the heat from the alcohol slowly, making his own face flush red in the cold night. He gently shook his empty beer can, secretly blaming the alcohol for making the rational thoughts in his head gradually waver. When the beer ran out and the chill began to slowly seep through his coat, he softly spoke up to suggest they should end their drinking session soon and head home. While Riyun was struggling to find a place to throw the trash, Uisin unexpectedly brought up the apartment again and asserted that if she really needed to live there. He looked deeply into her wavering eyes and asserted that if she was truly at a dead end, let him help her find the final way out. He suggests that she should use him to get that loan instead of her cheating ex-fiancé. He explains that since he never planned on getting married anyway, he would never have a use for a newlywed housing loan. Panic suddenly flares in Uisin's eyes as he realizes he may have just crossed a major line. He worries that his sudden offer sounded far too much like a romantic confession as he looks at Riyun's blank expression. To his surprise, Riyun breaks out into a wide, drunken grin, wondering what he'll think of her for what she's about to say. She leans in and drunkenly jokes that since he's also looking for a place, they really should just live together. Uisin realizes she's completely wasted, and he chalks the entire ridiculous conversation up to the alcohol. The next morning, a phone alarm blares at 7:10 a.m., cutting through the silence of the room. Riyun groans, her eyes still closed as she tries to ignore the morning light and her pounding headache. Beside her, Uisin's eyes snap wide open as the hazy memories of the previous night begin to flood back. They both bolt upright in bed, staring ahead in complete and utter shock at their current situation. Riyun hides her face in her hands, mortified by the realization that she completely lost her mind once she got drunk. She tries to ignore the awkwardness and tells herself to just focus on getting ready for work. She checks her phone's recent call log, seeing calls from friends and work, but nothing from the person she expected. Seeing not a single missed call from her ex, she finally accepts that he really has no desire to hold on to her. Hyuk-jae sat in the office with a calculating look on his face, secretly thinking about what he truly felt at this moment. He approached Suji's desk and used work as the perfect excuse to invite his female colleague to have lunch with him. While waiting for Suji to get ready, this man slightly loosened his tie with a triumphant look as if he already had his prey firmly in his grasp. The elevator chime rang, signaling the descent from the 12th floor, where dark secrets began to be exposed. As soon as the elevator doors closed, their hands immediately found each other and intertwined affectionately as an affirmation of their illicit relationship. Despite the other person's worry about their colleagues' prying eyes, Hyuk-jae casually brushed it off and claimed that this space belonged only to the two of them. Suji slightly narrowed her eyes at him and didn't forget to press him about Riyun's reaction after their intense confrontation earlier. With a contemptuous tone, this jerk recounted how his fiancé demanded to call off the wedding and even brought a boyfriend along to make a scene in front of him. His mistress pressed herself close and grilled him about his true intentions, whether he would dare to decisively break off his engagement to be with her or not. Hyuk-jae looked ahead with lifeless eyes, asserting that he was getting older and getting married right now was the most practical choice. Hyuk-jae suddenly paused as a dark thought and pragmatic calculation flashed through his mind. He secretly compared Suji with Riyun and realized this female colleague seemed to be a more profitable choice for the future, so he told himself that no one would blame him if he had a change of heart. Swallowing greedily at the other person's sexiness, he nervously asked what Suji really thought of him. Suji didn't hesitate to step closer and boldly asked whether he wanted to marry her instead of continuing his engagement with Riyun. She gave a seductive smile and mockingly reminded him that, after all, she was currently someone with an official engagement herself. She teasingly asked if he wanted her to leave her fiancé to be with him, making Hyuk-jae sheepishly explain that it was because he had already fallen too deeply in love with her. He was dumbfounded when Suji unexpectedly replied that she also had feelings for him, an affirmation that made him sink even deeper into his illusions. She pressed close to his ear and whispered bewitchingly that she liked him way more than her current boyfriend, leaving him completely captivated. As soon as the elevator doors opened, Suji walked away decisively with a haughty click-clack of her heels on the floor, as if she already had this guilty man wrapped around her finger. She slightly turned her head with a meaningful smile, reminding the assistant not to be so lost in thought that he forgets to step out before the doors close. Hyuk-jae let out a calculating, triumphant smile, It seemed he had completely wiped Ryun from his mind after his awful actions. He leisurely strolled beside his Mr. Suji and began discussing the lunch menu at a nearby fried pork restaurant as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, the sign of Friendly Real Estate Office appeared like the opening of a new chapter full of financial worries in Ryun's life. Hong couldn't hide his astonishment at seeing the unbelievably cheap deposit and immediately realized this was the lottery-won apartment causing a fever in the news. The real estate agent smiled brightly and warmly affirmed that Ryun was holding on to a rare stroke of luck, urging her not to miss the chance to own this one-of-a-kind apartment. However, the excited atmosphere suddenly dropped when the group sat down to discuss the massive bank loan taking up 60% of the initial value. Ryun hastily spoke up to ask everyone to pause for a moment so she could think more thoroughly about the financial risks surrounding her. While Salmon feared losing all her savings if the house was put up for auction, Hong vehemently opposed it, arguing that they couldn't find a place to stay in Seoul at such a bargain price anywhere else. Ryun stood amidst the conflicting opinions but remained steadfast, boldly guaranteeing that she would absolutely never let a delay in bank interest payments happen. Faced with her friend's determination, Hong sighed and asserted that he had also been working incredibly hard all this time, leaving Salmon to look at him with a highly skeptical face. Ryun looked at the other person with a stern face when unexpectedly grilled about her current job to verify her financial capacity. Meanwhile, at the Friendly Real Estate Office, the atmosphere turned gloomy as potential clients began decisively walking out the door. The agent stood in front of the office advising her to go home and rest, not forgetting to remind her to spend more time thinking it over carefully. As soon as the others were out of sight, he approached and revealed that up to 3 couples in a similar situation had to run away in fear. With a concerned face, he explained that no one wanted to take a risk on an apartment burdened with massive debt amidst rampant deposit fraud schemes. He unexpectedly grabbed Ryun's hand tightly and urgently proposed that she consider selling her home buying rights to end all current financial worries. The broker excitedly guaranteed that if she agreed to the transaction right away, she would surely net a clear profit of up to 200 million won. Ryun silently looked at him with highly skeptical eyes as she began to notice something wrong behind this excessive eagerness. She boldly asserted that if she sold the house now, she would have to bear an income tax rate of up to 70%, leaving him completely stunned. Standing opposite that suspicious silence, she straightforwardly questioned the reason why he kept pressuring her to give up ownership of the apartment. The broker narrowed his eyes with a mocking smile, hurling an insult at Ryun that a girl who looked like her was a terrifyingly money-grubbing person. Suppressing the resentment inside her heart, Ryun decisively turned her back and left the real estate office with heavy, melancholic footsteps. She suddenly stopped, turned her head to glare at the awful man behind her with an expression of unconcealable outrage. Standing in front of the office, she boldly admitted she loved money but questioned the other guy what kind of greed it was to force her to sell at a loss, and asserted that she was not stupid enough to fall into his trap. Walking alone under the withered trees, Ryun let out a soft sigh of frustration as she felt reality becoming increasingly harsh. Her face clearly showed a dead end as she mumbled to herself, blaming herself that all her efforts right now seemed to become meaningless and desperate. Amidst the noisy urban space, she silently bowed her head and kept walking with a soul full of unhealed wounds. Her gaze suddenly stopped at a brightly lit pine tree canopy, and she shockingly realized that another Christmas season was about to arrive. The harsh reality evoked a painful memory of last year when she was still happily hand in hand with Hyuk-jae under the shimmering lights. Her phone screen vibrated continuously with inquiring messages from her group of friends, but her heart right now was left with only a numbing emptiness. A few days had passed since that fateful night, but Ryun still hadn't received any reply messages from her treacherous boyfriend. She quietly looked at her phone screen in the middle of the crowded street, secretly blaming herself for keeping a false hope in a guy who always chose to run away from everything. Looking at the clock hitting 11:30 a.m., she secretly thought that he must be preparing to enter his leisurely lunch break by now. Standing amidst the quiet space, she made up her mind that no matter the outcome, the two of them needed to have one last straightforward talk. The harsh sunlight shone on the towering office building where that awful man was working without ever knowing of her presence. Ri-yun let out an exhausted sigh as she stood observing the hurried flow of people going in and out of the building lobby from afar. Among the unfamiliar crowd, she began to feel regretful and told herself that suddenly showing up at his workplace at this time was going overboard. She intended to turn her back and leave, secretly thinking that perhaps she should just leave a short message instead of trying to confront him directly. Suddenly, her gaze stopped dead when she caught the familiar silhouette of Hyuk-jae happily and affectionately strolling beside a strange girl. Watching that haughty back, Ri-yun shockingly realized that the mistress's hairstyle was exactly identical to hers, an ironic truth that completely shattered her heart. The image of the woman lying next to Hyuk-jae on that fateful night appeared as a cruel reminder of the betrayal she had been bearing. Right at this moment, Ri-yun had to bitterly listen to the gossip from colleagues about Hyuk-jae once again going to lunch with his mistress Suji. The whispers about their shady relationship and secret dates were like knives piercing through the bleeding self-esteem of the young woman. Unable to hold back any longer, her hand tightly gripped her handbag strap in sheer rage at the brazenness of her unfaithful ex-boyfriend. Choked with resentment, she quietly followed them right into the restaurant and sat at the very next table to prepare to face the harsh truth. Ri-yun was stunned hearing Suji coquettishly demanding to hold hands, challenging the very caution that the man had always fake-maintained before. Hyuk-jae casually asserted that once they got married, all these sinful secrets would go public without having to be wary of anyone. Each of his words added fuel to the fire, making Ri-yun's eyes flash with deep red streaks of hatred for the traitor. She stood frozen, witnessing the two betrayers casually holding hands and laughing affectionately right in the middle of a crowded place. The climax of the humiliation was when Hyuk-jae boldly suggested his mistress wear a wedding dress to replace Ri-yun and walk down the aisle at the venue he had already booked. Ri-yun decisively marched straight toward the table of the two betrayers, leaving both Suji and Hyuk-jae inevitably stunned by this sudden appearance. Hyuk-jae turned pale upon realizing his ex-fiancé was standing right before his eyes. His face clearly showed shock mixed with fear at being caught red-handed. Without letting him have a chance to question why she was here, Ri-yun decisively threw a glass of cold water right in the unfaithful man's face in front of everyone. The freezing water streamed down Hyuk-jae's shocked face, leaving him standing rooted to the spot in utter humiliation. Ri-yun looked at him with ice-cold eyes, even as Hyuk-jae began yelling and asking what the hell she was thinking to pull off such a rude stunt. This jerk kept complaining about having to return to the office and worrying about his pathetic appearance, making Ri-yun realize he only selfishly thought of himself. She recalled his fake excuses about it being a momentary mistake, only to bitterly realize it was actually a calculated betrayal. Looking at the soaking wet guy in front of her, she bitterly asserted that she never imagined he would be so despicable as to have a plan to replace the bride altogether. Ri-yun let out a contemptuous chuckle and thanked him for helping her decisively throw away the last shred of respect she had left for his kind. After slamming the glass down on the table, causing Suji to scream in panic, she boldly declared that from now on, the two of them should never see each other's faces again. Ri-yun decisively turned her back and walked away, ignoring her terrible ex-boyfriend who was still furiously screaming and demanding that she pay the laundry bill for his stained shirt. The restaurant's door chime rang out like a full stop to a romance riddled with betrayal, leaving a suffocating atmosphere behind the young woman's back. Standing in the middle of the crowded street, Ri-yun tremblingly held her phone to make a fateful call. It seemed she had resolved to execute a highly risky pact. At his office desk, Kim Uisin's phone unexpectedly vibrated with Jinriyeon's name displayed on the screen right when he was busy. Uisin was slightly surprised to see his best friend calling during working hours. His intuition told him that something must have gone wrong. He hurriedly picked up the phone and jumped up from his office chair, ready to listen to the confessions from the girl he always cared about. Walking under a pine tree brilliant with Christmas lights, Ri-yun choked up and asked Uisin whether his previous marriage proposal was sincere or just a drunken joke. With resolute eyes mixed with despair, she boldly declared that if he was truly serious, she accepted entering into this marriage with him. The unexpected marriage proposal from his best friend left Uisin completely shocked. His heart seemed to skip a beat at Ri-yun's bold decision. He hastily dashed out of the office with a deeply worried face, constantly pressing to know what happened, only to receive a demand that he must answer her question first. Ri-yeon tore at her hair in a dead-end state amidst the crowded street, choking up as she asked Uisin if his earlier marriage proposal was truly sincere. She slightly bowed her head, her mind in turmoil from the heavy pressures and the feeling that she was falling into a deep abyss of despair with no way out. On the other end of the line, Uisin let out a thoughtful sigh, understanding the extreme resentment that the girl he cared about was bearing. With a warm and firm voice, he boldly asserted that he was absolutely serious and never had any intention of playing around with her feelings. Hearing those promises, Ri-yeon couldn't hold back her tears. She sobbed, affirming that she was also completely serious about this risky decision. Uisin gently suggested that the two of them meet up in person soon to discuss it thoroughly, while also telling her to just wait for him to come right after work. Sitting at the coffee shop with a dazed face from exhaustion, Ri-yeon seemed still unable to regain her composure after the horrifying recent events. Uisin looked at her with deeply sympathetic eyes. His face grew tense as he began listening to her recount the harsh truths about her ex-boyfriend. Unable to contain his fury, he yelled that the guy was total trash and asserted that had he been there, the guy definitely wouldn't have gotten off easily. After calming down a bit, he let out a soft sigh, then asked in a low voice to ensure that the relationship between her and that traitor was truly, completely over. Ri-yeon slightly bowed her head and said she had officially announced the cancellation of the wedding to her treacherous boyfriend. Uisin looked at her with deeply worried eyes, thoughtfully asking whether her state of mind right now was actually okay. Ri-yeon gave a relieved smile, confessing that she surprisingly felt okay after everything. She confided that perhaps because a prolonged, exhausting problem had finally ended, she felt truly relieved to not have to marry Hyuk-jae. Recalling the scene of throwing water in his face, she firmly affirmed that there was absolutely no chance for the two of them to get back together. Even though the housing issue had become more complicated, she still gave a wry smile, while Uisin reassured her not to worry too much. Ri-yeon boldly declared that everything would be fine if she took out that bank loan under her own name. Uisin looked at her with extremely serious eyes, reiterating his previous marriage proposal and confirming he wasn't joking at all. Ri-yeon laughed and waved it off, saying that she had just slipped up in a moment of confusion earlier, so he shouldn't mind it too much. Seeing Uisin still resolutely affirming he was truly serious, Ri-yeon gently waved her hand to decline, saying that she couldn't accept this help. Uisin explained in a low voice that if he applied for the loan under his own name, it was highly likely that a John's lease application would be rejected by the bank. Seeing Ri-yeon bewildered, he showed a hint of astonishment and asked back if she truly hadn't looked into these complicated loan regulations at all. To clear all doubts, the two decided to head to Nara Bank together to find the most accurate answer for their current situation. The female bank clerk thoughtfully explained that loan regulations had just been significantly tightened to prevent real estate speculation. She informed them that although the lottery winning price was 590 million won, the market value had crossed the 1 billion won mark, a number that left both of them completely staggered. Upon hearing the confirmation that the home rental loan definitely wouldn't be approved, Ri-yeon could only bow her head in a dead end while Uisin also fell into deep thought. The bank's door chime rang dryly as they left, bringing along a heavy atmosphere regarding the financial burden that was growing day by day. Despite Uisin's attempts to persuade her to take advantage of the newlywed loan package, Ri-yeon hesitantly suggested switching to a monthly rental to manage on her own. She hurriedly waved her hands to refuse because she felt too guilty, but he immediately reassured her that this change actually wouldn't negatively affect his life at all. He looked at her with deeply empathetic eyes and decisively advised her to just think about herself, because this was the best win-win solution. Uisin looked at her with sincere eyes, suggesting the two of them go find a new place to live together and asserting that he would support her by bearing half the rent. Ri-yeon hastily refused, not wanting to become a burden, but he still urgently begged her to let him help out during this dead end. The door of a shabby apartment opened. Harsh reality hit with a completely bare room and walls patched with cracks and dampness. Ri-yeon gasped in shock seeing the wallpaper covered in pitch-black mold, while the agent kept blabbering on that this place was very cheap and spacious. Another option presented itself as a cramped studio room just big enough to fit exactly one bed, with a sky-high deposit price that was entirely non-negotiable. Even a seemingly nicer office style demanded a deposit of up to 50 million won along with an extremely expensive monthly rent. Faced with numbers beyond her paying capacity, Riyeon dropped her head in agony, while Uisin could only anxiously ask if she could still hold on. The agent clicked his tongue, reminding the young woman that in the heart of glamorous Seoul, there absolutely never existed an apartment that was cheap, spacious, and clean all at once. Seeing Uisin's excessive concern, the old man casually advised the two to get married to enjoy social housing benefits, or simply move in together to save costs. Amidst a suffocatingly awkward atmosphere, Uisin could only cover his mouth and fake a cough to hide his embarrassment, while Riyeon sank deep into her chaotic thoughts. As they drive away, Riyeon ponders why she hadn't considered living together as an option, figuring that one more crazy decision won't make a difference. She looks over at Uisin, thinking that if it's with someone as trustworthy as him, she'd be perfectly willing to share a home. She watches him as he focuses on the road, realizing how much she's come to rely on his presence and support. She mumbles under her breath that he's someone she can truly trust, but Uisin only catches a fragment and asks what she said. Uisin turns to her and asks directly if she actually wants to live together, his expression neutral but curious. Startled, Riyeon immediately rejects the idea, asking if he's lost his mind, though she can't help but feel flustered. She points out that they're already planning a fake marriage just for a house, and moving in together feels like an entirely different level of crazy. Uisin calmly argues that both options are equally unconventional, so there's really no significant difference between them. He suggests that living together without love might actually be more common than filing a fake marriage certificate. Suddenly, he slams on the brakes as a red light appears, the car jolting to a halt. Uisin quickly reaches across to steady Riyeon, his hand gripping her shoulder to keep her from flying forward. He scolds her for even considering such an offer from just anyone, warning her about the potential dangers of living with a complete stranger. His protective side flares up as he tells her to never make an offer like that to anyone else, his face flushing with a mix of anger and concern. Riyeon is taken aback by his sudden outburst, but as he apologizes for rambling, she starts to realize how much he truly cares for her safety. The car sits at the intersection, the reflection in the side mirror showing the quiet street as they both settle back into the silence of their shared journey. Under the traffic light that had just turned green, Riyeon softly confessed that she only dared to make such a bold proposal because the person next to her was him. Uisin was momentarily stunned, his eyes clearly showing bewilderment as he tried to digest the full weight of his best friend's unexpected confession. Sitting in the car, she recalled their 15-year friendship and affirmed that it was because of absolute trust that she didn't hesitate to share her deepest secrets with him. As the car rolled down the street, she began analyzing the monthly fee of 2 million won and argued that sharing a spacious apartment was the most economical solution. Seeing the other person stay silent, Riyeon quickly let out an awkward laugh and told him to just forget about it if he felt uncomfortable, secretly regretting her abruptness. Uisin's face suddenly turned bright red, while Riyeon silently regretted it and told herself that had she known he would react so strongly, she would never have brought it up. The car continued speeding under the deep purple evening sky, leaving both of them with a suffocating sense of embarrassment and awkwardness. The brilliant morning sunlight shone through the building's window, signaling the start of a new day after a long night full of turbulence and thoughts. The alarm rang continuously from the phone lying abandoned on the mattress, tearing through the room's early morning silence. Uisin jolted awake in bed with a dazed face from shock, trying to piece together the fragmented memories of last night's earth-shattering event. Uisin sat blankly on the bed after waking up, thinking to himself that his best friend Riyeon was indeed a very special and unpredictable woman. The memory of her bold proposal to move in together last night suddenly rushed back, making his heart flutter, inevitably. His face flushed red as he reassured himself that living together was absolutely impossible under the current circumstances. While his mind was still in turmoil, he hastily reached for the phone vibrating continuously on the mattress, silently questioning his true feelings for her. His eyes showed astonishment upon realizing that the caller was his mother, signaling the start of a highly troublesome conversation. As soon as he picked up, he was stunned to hear his mother remind him of the 7 p.m. appointment tonight at the Pallid Hotel, which he had seemingly completely forgotten. His mother kept urging and asking if he had forgotten the blind date that his father had painstakingly arranged in advance. Uisin let out a heavy sigh of exhaustion, asserting to his mother that he was too fed up and no longer wanted to participate in such forced meetings. On the other end of the line, his mother could only lament that his father would never give up until he saw him happily settled down. She sadly apologized and explained that because this was the daughter of an extremely important partner, he was forced to show up to save face for the family. Under the traffic light that had just changed colors, Rian softly confessed that she only dared to make such a bold proposal because the person next to her was him. Uisin was momentarily stunned, his eyes clearly showing bewilderment as he tried to digest the full weight of his best friend's unexpected confession. Sitting in the car, she recalled their 15-year friendship and affirmed that it was because of absolute trust that she didn't hesitate to share her deepest secrets with him. As the car rolled down the street, she began analyzing the monthly fee of 2 million won and argued that sharing a spacious apartment was the most economical solution. Seeing the other person stay silent, Ryun quickly let out an awkward laugh and told him to just forget about it if he felt uncomfortable, secretly regretting her abruptness. Uisin's face suddenly turned bright red, while Ryun silently regretted it and told herself that had she known he would react so strongly, she would never have brought it up. The car continued speeding under the deep purple evening sky, leaving both of them with a suffocating sense of embarrassment and awkwardness. The brilliant morning sunlight shone through the building's window, signaling the start of a new day after a long night full of turbulence and thoughts. The alarm rang continuously from the phone lying abandoned on the mattress, tearing through the room's early morning silence. Uisin jolted up with a serious face, silently recalling Ryun's affectionate scolding that she would never make such a proposal to anyone else. Uisin brushed his teeth while scolding himself for being a lunatic to let wandering thoughts about Ryun occupy his mind all morning. But then he still couldn't stop the rekindling emotions, silently admitting that he was truly swayed by last night's bold proposal. In his eyes, Ryun was a girl full of bravery who always knew how to find a way out amidst countless dead ends, completely contrasting with his usual resignation. He let out a soft laugh thinking about her somewhat quirky personality, a captivating difference that kept him lingering in endless thoughts. The lights from the luxury building shone brightly in the night, where Uisin was forced to face a strained blind date arranged by his family. The other party appeared extremely satisfied seeing his masculine appearance and affirmed that with this face, he could absolutely become a celebrity. The girl didn't hesitate to express her affection for Uisin but also felt a hint of sadness upon realizing that his mind seemed to be somewhere else. She suggested that they both be honest with each other and advised him not to deceive his true feelings right now due to family or company pressure. Faced with that sincerity, Uisin slightly bowed his head in apology and prepared to issue a firm rejection to end this charade early. Under the magnificent chandelier, he stated in a deep voice that no matter who the other person was, he had never intended to get married. Uisin was slightly taken aback when the girl opposite him casually confirmed that the rumors about his aversion to marriage turned out to be true. She smiled softly and revealed that her group of female friends was buzzing with gossip about the Magnolia Egg conglomerate's precious son being someone who strongly rejected marriage. Faced with the other party's thorough knowledge of his failed blind date history, Uisin could only force an awkward smile. She leisurely took a sip of coffee and pressed to ask if he truly didn't have a girlfriend or didn't even have the slightest intention of dating anyone. She looked deep into his eyes and boldly questioned whether he just hated force meetings or if he was actually gay. Taking a sip of tea, she calmly declared that as long as he wasn't gay, she was willing to accept all of his different quirks. She decisively suggested that they continue to maintain this relationship because she herself wasn't keen on dating just to end up in marriage either. In the middle of the luxurious room, she firmly asserted that the two of them must meet again despite Uisin still sinking into awkward silence. Standing alone in front of the hotel, Uisin blankly told himself that in reality, he had devoted his entire mind to another girl. Suddenly, the phone ringing continuously tore through the quiet atmosphere, making him hastily snap back to reality to check the newly arrived notification. Uisin quietly stepped out of the luxury hotel lobby, his face pale as he had to endure the wrath and relentless questioning from his father. He gently closed his eyes in exhaustion as the old man continuously screamed about the false rumors regarding his sexuality and long-standing anti-marriage attitude. Standing alone by the roadside, he decisively demanded that his father never arrange any more blind dates, despite the authoritative imposition from the other end of the line. His eyes flared with resentment as his father once again used the interests of the Siyun Construction Corporation as a shield to force him into a marriage of convenience. The ringing shouts in his ear made his mind begin to reel, the surrounding space suddenly blurring in extreme dizziness. Suddenly, the image of Ri-yeon and her bold proposal to move in together last night flooded back as a final lifeline for him to escape his family's siege. Without letting his father finish the threat about next week's appointment, he boldly declared that he would officially get married, leaving the other party completely stunned. With a resolute face, he affirmed that he had found the true woman to love and decisively ended the call amid the astonishment of his domineering father. Standing in the cold night street, he coldly made a final demand to cut off all binding relationships, so he could wholeheartedly protect his choice. Uisin walked quickly toward the waiting car, his hands tightly gripping the phone like a silent pledge to a new future beside Ri-yeon. Kim Uisin walked quickly toward the luxury blue car, his hand still pressing the phone to his ear amidst the impatient ringing tone. As soon as she answered, he called out Ri-yeon's name in a deep voice, his face clearly showing seriousness after having just made an earth-shattering decision with his family. On the other end of the line, Ri-yeon, who was wearing a face mask, suddenly boldly proposed that they move in together and head straight into marriage. Faced with this unexpected boldness, the young woman suddenly felt her heart pounding and pressed to ask the reason for his sudden change in attitude. In her fluster, she hastily raised a hand to hold the slipping face mask and told him to wait for her a moment to regain her composure. Uisin smiled softly in agreement, then politely bowed to the valet attendant before stepping into the car to continue the fateful conversation. As he placed his hands on the steering wheel, he teased her about her beauty routine, making Ri-yeon admit it was part of an interesting revenge plan. The car rolled down the night street as Ri-yeon confided that becoming beautiful and happy was the best way to make her ex-boyfriend regret. Uisin let out a warm laugh and fully supported this highly positive method of revenge, making Ri-yeon feel extremely proud of herself. He lightly pressed the Bluetooth connection button to chat more conveniently, but then paused at the unexpected question about their next destination. Ri-yeon felt a hint of suspicion when she heard Uisin uttering a word of thanks to someone right before picking up the phone to talk with her. She gasped in shock hearing him confess that he had just finished a strained blind date arranged by his family. With an astonished face, she continuously pressed to ask why he would agree to participate in that meeting at this sensitive time. Uisin sat thoughtfully in the car, softly asking if it would be a nuisance if he came to see her in person right now. He smiled softly, explaining that he urgently needed to discuss their marriage situation to prepare for their next steps. Ri-yeon looked at the half-applied face mask, then complained half-laughing, half-crying about having to wash it off and prepare everything all over again. However, she still smiled meaningfully and urged him to just come straight to her house, instead of taking the trouble to find a coffee shop that was still open. Despite Uisin still hesitating and worrying about the abruptness, she firmly demanded that he arrive quickly, so they could start the conversation soon. Hearing the sincere urging from his best friend, Uisin's eyes lit up and he softly uttered a confirmation of agreement full of happiness. The car sped away down the quiet night street, carrying the promise that he would be there soon to help her write the next chapter of their lives. Under the neon lights of the Odia coffee shop, the night atmosphere suddenly became stifling as new calculations began to spark. Uisin sat deep in thought with a tense face, seemingly going through an intense psychological struggle after his recent impulsive decisions. Ri-yeon couldn't hide her panic, pressing to ask if he really had slipped up and announced to his father an unplanned marriage. Taking a gentle sip of bitter coffee, she expressed her doubt whether such a strict father would ever accept a fake marriage contract. Uisin listened in silence with an agonized expression, silently understanding that his family's opposition would be an incredibly huge barrier for both of them. He unexpectedly told her in a deep voice not to worry about his father's opinion, asserting that he could completely ignore all impositions from him. Ri-yeon was stunned by that strangely cold gaze, silently wondering what had made her normally gentle friend suddenly become so fierce. He leaned closer to reassure her and guaranteed that he would take responsibility for ensuring this marriage wouldn't be interfered with by his family. Still not fully convinced, she hesitantly asked if his parents would truly bless a relationship that had merely started from these calculations. Immediately, Riyun had to endure her mother's wrath over the phone as she screamed, asking if she had lost her mind to choose such a crazy marriage. Riyun hesitantly explained to her mother that getting married wasn't just purely a matter of money or real estate. Outside the coffee shop, her mother's stern lectures on morality and humanity still echoed through the phone. The suspicious mother pressed to ask whether she was telling a friend's story to test the family's opinion. Unable to lie to herself anymore, Riyun slightly blushed and bravely admitted that it was actually her own trouble. She tiredly listened to the reproaches, silently understanding that her family would be the biggest obstacle in this plan. The ringing bell signaled her to decisively end the call to quickly return to the table to discuss with her best friend. With her feet taking quick strides across the floor, she approached Uisin with a face still holding a hint of confusion and exhaustion. Standing in front of him, she crossed her arms and firmly asserted that her mother would never accept such a flash marriage. Uisin thoughtfully observed her expression, then softly spoke up to ask if it was time for both of them to execute Plan B as discussed. Riyun nodded slightly in agreement, her eyes clearly showing determination as she boldly declared that they should begin this perfect act together. Riyun flipped open the notebook page, preparing to write down the important commitments for a calculated marriage pact. She began to put pen to paper and reminded Uisin that they both needed to carefully review what they had agreed upon from the start. The text of a one-year contract appeared clearly, matching the current restricted period for real estate transfers. Sitting opposite each other in the middle of the coffee shop, they finalized the plan to sell the house or pay off the principal immediately after the one-year term ended. Her small hands meticulously wrote an additional clause on respecting personal lifestyles, an indispensable term for maintaining harmony when moving in together. Uisin thoughtfully calculated and suggested that they should add the details arising on moving day before officially taking the agreement to be notarized. Riyun smiled softly, full of hope, silently wondering about the next challenges that both of them were about to face. The key task right now was to act their roles perfectly to deceive their families and group of close friends, especially the suspicion from Salman. Uisin's eyes suddenly turned serious as he reminded her that there was still an incredibly huge barrier if they wanted their parents to believe this was a real marriage. Faced with that cryptic warning, Riyun couldn't help but be taken aback and frantically asked back about the existence of the obstacle hindering their plan. Riyun softly confided that she only brought up the proposal to move in together and execute this marriage pact because that person was him. Uisin was slightly stunned, his eyes clearly showing bewilderment as he tried to digest the full weight of his best friend's unexpected confession. Sitting in the car, she recalled their 15-year friendship and affirmed that it was because of absolute trust that she didn't hesitate to share her deepest secrets. As the car rolled down the street, she began calculating the fee of more than 2 million won per month and argued that sharing an apartment was the most economical solution. Seeing the other person stay silent, Riyun blushed shyly and told him to just forget about it, secretly regretting her abruptness. Uisin was also inevitably confused, thinking to himself that had he known she would react so strongly, he would never have brought up this issue. The space inside the car suddenly became quiet under the night sky, leaving both of them with a suffocating sense of embarrassment and awkwardness. The brilliant morning sunlight began to shine through the building's window, signaling a new day with important decisions about to take place. The alarm rang continuously from the phone lying abandoned on the mattress, pulling them both back to a reality full of worries. Standing at the threshold to face both their families, Riyun suddenly felt her legs trembling and frantically wondered why she was this scared. Riyun stood at the threshold, softly apologizing and suggesting that Uisin give her a moment to take a deep breath to regain her composure. Uisin looked at her with full empathy, then asked in a deep voice if she was really feeling immense pressure before this meeting. He gently held out his arm as a solid support, inviting her to hold on to it to gain more courage to face his family. With a warm smile, he encouraged her that relying on him right now would be the best medicine to ease her insecurities. The young woman looked up at him slightly with flushed cheeks, feeling the warmth and sincerity radiating from her longtime best friend. Her hand tightly gripped his sleeve as if seeking an absolute protection before stepping foot into the unfamiliar house ahead. Standing in front of the large door of the luxurious mansion, Uisin boldly announced to his mother that the two of them had officially arrived. Immediately, his mother warmly opened the door to welcome them with a radiant face, unable to hide her excitement at seeing her son bring a girlfriend home. His mother endlessly praised Riyun's lovely beauty that far exceeded her expectations, leaving Uisin only able to smile proudly. In the cozy atmosphere, Riyun politely handed over the small gift she had prepared in advance, making the mother extremely moved by the thoughtfulness of her future daughter-in-law. As they step into the sprawling, luxurious foyer, Mayor Yuzin asks them to have a seat while she goes upstairs to help Yuzin's father finish getting ready. Yuzin gently places a hand on Riyun's back, guiding her toward the living area as he suggests they sit down and get comfortable. Still feeling a bit overwhelmed by the grand setting and the occasion, Riyun blushes slightly and gives a soft agreement. Yuzin offers to take her coat and hang it up for her. She smiles and thanks him for the help. He tells her to just wait there for a moment while he handles their coats, and Riyun gives him a small nod of understanding. Left alone in the massive living room, Riyun sits perched on the edge of the large sofa, her gaze wandering over the opulent decorations and high ceilings. She is struck by the realization that this grand, imposing place is the home where Yuzin actually grew up. It hits her that despite their long history, Yuzin had never once spoken about his family or his background until now. She thinks back to their early days as college freshmen, remembering how Yuzin had always been a quiet and somewhat mysterious figure. Back then, Riyun had only seen him as another student in their wider circle of acquaintances. Over the next 15 years, their paths continued to cross, often through mutual friends like Salman and her boyfriend. As she hears the sound of footsteps on the stairs, Riyun realizes with a start that she doesn't know the man she's about to marry as well as she thought. She looks up, her eyes wide with a mix of anticipation and nerves as someone begins to descend the staircase. Yuzin's father, an imposing man with a stern presence, appears on the landing. Riyun immediately stands and bows deeply, introducing herself with a polite greeting. Père Yuzin looks down at her with a calm but piercing gaze, his silent expression offering no hint of his initial impression. A dignified middle-aged man appeared, gently apologizing for making everyone wait and gesturing for all to begin dinner. Riyun sat modestly on her chair, her cheeks flushing red with tension as she secretly thought that Uisin's father's aura was truly too intimidating and made others feel uneasy. The atmosphere at the dinner table relaxed a bit when his mother kindly served food to Riyun, introducing it as a dish she had enthusiastically stewed since early morning, making her quickly express her gratitude. The soft clatter of a glass hitting the table unexpectedly cut through the silence, signaling that the head of the family was about to begin a calculated interrogation. While Uisin's mother was still happily praising the tenderness of the meat, his father kept a cold face, leisurely taking a sip of tea as if scrutinizing the other person. He suddenly backed Riyun into a corner by pressing her about the school she graduated from and her current job to make a living, despite his wife trying to persuade him to leave it until after dinner. Suppressing her embarrassment, Riyun put down her chopsticks and politely explained that she used to study in the composition department at Yona University and was currently a music composer. The father's sharp eyes still didn't let up as he continued to drill deep into her career, questioning why she chose commercial music instead of classical music. He bluntly stated that if she had pursued classical music, building social relationships and marrying into a prestigious family would be much easier, prompting Uisin to lower his voice to remind his father. Riyun could only give a forced smile and explain that making a living through music was her dream, but classical music was very difficult to cover living expenses and didn't fit her personal taste at all. Uisin's father continued to attack with rude questions about whether Riyun's parents were facing financial difficulties for her to be so obsessed with money like that. The statement touched a nerve on her self-esteem, causing the atmosphere to freeze up and forcing Uisin to speak up, demanding his father stop immediately. He couldn't maintain his usual composure and snapped, demanding that his father not be allowed to be rude to his woman for even another second. Riyun turned in astonishment to look at her longtime best friend. She had never seen such a fierce side of him, so ready to protect her. Deep inside her heart, a strange feeling suddenly welled up, secretly thinking that although she had seen him irritable a few times, This was the first time Kim Uisin truly exploded in rage. Memories suddenly flooded back to that evening at the coffee shop when Uisin had advised her in advance that if he accidentally lost his temper in front of his parents, he hoped she wouldn't think poorly of him. At that time, he had affirmed with utter sincerity that Jinriyeon absolutely didn't need to care or pay attention to any imposed opinions from his father's side. With resolute eyes, he advised her that those words were completely unworthy of entering her ears or affecting the mood of both of them. Returning to reality, the powerful father still maintained a stern face, staring at the couple as if re-evaluating the degree of his son's seriousness. After a moment of tense silence, he let out a soft sigh and coldly declared that he would get straight to the main point right now. Uisin's father suddenly changed his attitude, offering to arrange a house nearby and buy cars for the two of them so they wouldn't have to worry about money. While Jinriyeon was still awkwardly about to decline, Uisin coldly affirmed that neither of them had any intention of accepting any support from him. A strong hand unexpectedly gripped her hand tightly as an affirmation of absolute protection right in front of his parent. Before Jinriyeon's astonished look and blushing cheeks, he sternly warned his father never to dream of forcing her to do anything for him. Amidst the tense atmosphere at the dining table, Uisin loudly declared that there was no way Jinriyeon would have to fulfill the duties of what was called feudal daughter-in-law obligations. He bluntly exposed his father's scheme, stating that he only wanted to control Jinriyeon so he could order her around whenever he needed her help. Tightening his grip on his best friend's trembling hand, he declared that the two of them would live their own lives and forbade his father from dragging her into his troubles. Seeing his mother about to speak up to remind him about the family business, Uisin immediately interrupted with a decisive refusal. He firmly affirmed that his father's business had nothing to do with Jinriyeon, leaving her silently staring at his solid back that was protecting her. Turning to look at his mother with eyes full of heartache, he apologized for not being able to let the woman he loved endure the hardship and imposition that she herself had gone through. Uisin's father narrowed his eyes menacingly, softly uttering a lingering question, as if covertly predicting an impending storm. He bluntly declared that he would never bless this marriage, shocking Jinriyeon to the point where she couldn't believe her ears. Witnessing the cold father standing up to dismiss the guests, she panicked and tried to hold him back, only to receive a demand to leave immediately. In the middle of the large room, the figure of the powerful man decisively walked away with the assertion that there was nothing more to say, leaving behind his wife, who could only sigh helplessly. Jinriyeon looked on silently, her heart heavy upon realizing that Uisin's father's stubbornness far exceeded all her initial expectations. In that moment of deadlock, a firm grip from Uisin's hand suddenly reached over as if trying to hold onto the last bit of hope. She painfully realized that his hands were trembling and freezing cold, proof of the deep hurt he had suffered from his family for so long. The blue car sped away into the quiet night, carrying the exhaustion and unresolved worries of the young couple. Sitting in the car, Uisin sighed in exhaustion and choked back apologies for letting her hear such harsh words, but Jinriyeon quickly comforted him that she was fine. She began to worry about how to get his approval, agonizing over finding a way to convince that harsh father to change his decision. While driving, Uisin firmly affirmed that there was nothing to convince his father about, because right from the start he hadn't sought his blessing at all. He boldly declared that he had come to the mansion not to ask for permission, but simply to announce his decision to marry, which astonished Jinriyeon immensely. Looking at her face that still held a hint of shock, he gently asked his best friend to relax and not care too much about those harsh words just now. His hand reached out slightly and decisively affirmed that after all, the two of them were the ones truly in control of this marriage. The soft rustle as two hands intertwined in the quiet space of the car was like a commitment of companionship and protection. The sudden intimate action made Jinriyeon ask the reason in confusion, only to be rendered silent when she heard him worry that her fingertips were still freezing cold out of fear. The image of his trembling hands on the dining table suddenly reappeared, making her painfully realize that in reality, he was the one who had been under the heaviest pressure. Suppressing a sigh, she sincerely thanked him and understood that he had bravely confronted his father simply because he feared she would be hurt if she fell into his hands. Uisin's lips pursed tightly as he confided his inner thoughts that he absolutely didn't want to see the woman he loved used as a pawn by his own biological father. His gaze dropped as he mentioned the past, admitting he wanted to protect her from an imposed life full of suffering that he and his mother had once tasted. Uisin ended his confession by affirming that those were all the reasons he wanted to protect her from his father's control. Faint flutters of emotion spread as his hand continued to wrap around hers, creating a silent and warm bond in the dark night. While driving, Uisin suddenly noticed Ryun seemed distracted, so he told her to wait a moment, while she also responded blankly out of instinct. The blue light from the phone screen unexpectedly cast onto Ryun's face, drawing her attention to a notification that had just appeared. It was a text message from her ex-boyfriend Hyuk-jae proposing a meeting to settle the wedding cancellation fee, making her bitterly think that the habitual runaway was finally taking the initiative. Uisin glanced over and asked in a low voice if it was an important message when he saw her face suddenly turn serious. Seeing Ryun staring at her phone for a long time without taking her eyes off it, he gently reminded her to pull her back to reality. Amid the sound of the car engine in the city streets at night, she softly confessed that it was Hyuk-jae who wanted to meet to settle the remaining remnants of the broken wedding. Uisin's eyes suddenly became sharp and firm, as if he was implicitly making a decisive choice to protect her. Not letting her worry alone, he unexpectedly reached out to cover the phone and held her hand tightly as an affirmation that he would face the traitor with her. Ryun was flustered by Uisin's sudden hand-holding and wondered why, only to receive a warm explanation that he just wanted to comfort her. He softly confided that although he knew empty words might not help much, he still always longed to become a solid pillar of support for her. Ryun's eyes quivered slightly upon hearing him express his intention to give her strength, so she could stand strong against the coming storms. Uisin turned his face away slightly to hide his flushing cheeks and expressed his sincere hope that everything for both of them from now on would go smoothly. The intimate moment closed as their two hands gently let go of each other, leaving an indescribable flutter lingering throughout the quiet space in the car. He nodded firmly as a silent promise that he would always accompany her in every important step ahead. Ryun flashed a bright smile and waved goodbye, while reminding him that she would return soon after resolving everything. She didn't forget to raise her arm with an enthusiastic cheer, demonstrating an optimistic spirit and determination burning in her chest. Watching the figure of his best friend, Uisin let out a gentle, affectionate smile as if silently placing absolute faith in her capability. Their hands high-fived each other in a decisive slap as a vow for a tight bond and readiness to conquer every challenge ahead together. In the middle of the night, Uisin and Ryun decided to put aside their worries to go look for some sweets together as a way to reward themselves after a chaotic day. The scene shifted to a coffee shop under the bright sunlight, where Ryun prepared to have her final confrontation with the man who betrayed her. Hyuk-jae sat there with an annoyed face, loudly blaming Ryun for daring to track him down all the way to his company gate and asking her if she had any feeling of guilt at all. He continuously complained about her splashing water on him, forcing him to hurry to buy a new shirt and be late for work, as if he himself were the most pitiful victim. Ryun quietly observed the man before her with mocking eyes, secretly thinking that she was truly grateful to finally see his true colors clearly. She realized her biggest mistake was giving a master psychological manipulator the opportunity to play the victim as shamelessly as breathing. Memories of fierce arguments in the past came rushing back when she had to scream and fiercely dispute every lie he uttered. Back to reality, she calmly listened to him picking apart her impulsive personality, only feeling amused by the empty preaching. Looking at the man scratching his head in frustration, she understood that her previous anger had stemmed from the hope of a long-term commitment together. Now, when all connecting threads had snapped, Ryun realized she had no reason left to waste her anger on someone who no longer held value in her life. Ryun secretly resented why her terrible ex-boyfriend had to insist on choosing Christmas Day of all days to schedule a talk with her. Looking at the passing crowds immersed in festive joy, she couldn't help but feel bitter about her own situation. In the warm coffee shop, Ryun sat opposite Hyuk-jae and felt like she was the only miserable person left in the world. Hyuk-jae gave a sarcastic smile, questioning why she was silent and bringing up how she used to force him to explain whenever he made a mistake. In response to that provocation, Ryun just calmly looked at him and affirmed that since he was always silent, it proved he knew full well he was in the wrong from the very beginning. The remark hit the mark and stunned the cheater, leaving him uttering words of astonishment at her unusual sharpness and calmness. Not wanting to waste any more time, Ryun demanded he set aside those empty words to focus on settling the consequences of their broken engagement. Hyuk-jae contemptuously remarked that she really didn't have an ounce of charm right up to the final moment before deciding to end things. He shamelessly stood up and demanded she handle all the wedding refund procedures herself and then transfer half of that money into his account. Witnessing the selfishness of the man who was about to turn his back and leave, Ryun loudly warned him not to play lawsuit games later and to act completely fairly. Hyuk-jae turned back with a sarcastic remark that the broken engagement was her fault, so he had no reason to feel guilty at all. Ryun was stunned as she was shamelessly questioned back by the traitor about the ambiguous relationship between her and her best friend. In his mind appeared the image of catching her and Uisin holding hands walking on the street as ironclad evidence of infidelity. He continued to use that sudden proposal night to psychologically attack her, intending to turn her into a deceiver just like him. After throwing out threats of lawsuits if he didn't receive half the money, Hyuk-jae decisively turned his back and left her alone. Suppressing her anger, Ryun looked straight at the despicable man's back and coldly declared that she would also leave immediately. She watched the figure of the man she had spent a year and a half of her youth loving, suddenly feeling her heart strangely empty. Her hand tightened around the coffee cup, as if wanting to crush the resentment upon understanding that in fact he knew full well she had never betrayed him. Memories of that fateful night returned, making her bitterly realize he was merely taking advantage of the misunderstanding to shirk his financial responsibility. Witnessing the cheater walking away casually, she understood that if he truly believed she had an affair, things wouldn't have ended as smoothly as this. Ryun sat dazed in the coffee shop, bitterly realizing that the cold calculation without a hint of jealousy from her terrible ex was what disappointed her most. She told herself that everything had finally ended, while feeling a strange relief welling up inside her heart instead of pain. Memories of tiring days holding on returned, making her wonder if she had silently let go even before the official breakup words were spoken. Suppressing a sigh, she quietly sat looking at her phone and unexpectedly noticed a notification that had just popped up on the screen. It was a text message from Uisin asking if she wanted him to pick her up, making her astonished and wondering how he knew her location so well. An idea popped into her head to meet him in Hongdae, so she could take advantage of going to the studio and compose music while her emotions were surging. Brushing aside wandering thoughts, she smiled brightly upon realizing that she still had wonderful friends who were always ready to stand by and support her. Ryun quickly sent a text message reporting she was finished and asked where he was so they could meet up soon. The chime of the coffee shop door rang crisply, signaling her decisive departure from troubles to step toward a new future. Just as her feet stepped out of the shop, Ryun suddenly paused in surprise upon hearing her name called out loudly echoing amidst the bustling crowd on the street. Amidst the bustling crowd, Uisin stood there with a bright smile, waving his hand to greet Ryun as the most peaceful support on a freezing winter day. Ryun's eyes widened slightly in surprise mixed with emotion upon seeing the best friend who always appeared right when she felt most lonely. He gently held out a small gift, a cute stuffed animal keychain along with warm Christmas wishes, making the surrounding space light up. Uisin placed the gift into her hand and affectionately said he bought it simply because he felt it looked very much like her, making Ryun only able to ask back in confusion. While Ryun was still wondering whether it was a rabbit or a sheep, Uisin gently asked if she liked it because he truly thought it was immensely adorable. She cherished the gift in her hands, secretly thinking about his warmth while still haunted by the derogatory words she had just received from her ex-boyfriend. Memories of Hyuk-jae's toxic sarcasm that she didn't have an ounce of charm came back, making her painfully realize she was hurt more than imagined. Under the colorful lights, Ryun softly confided in Uisin that someone had just criticized her for being a girl completely lacking in charm. Upon hearing that, Uisin immediately turned to look at his best friend with an indignant expression and bluntly asserted that the person who said those words was definitely a massive fool. He looked deep into her eyes and repeated firmly to assert that the man was truly an idiot for not seeing her appeal. Ryun cherished the stuffed animal keychain in her hand, feeling the warm care from Uisin's small but meaningful Christmas gift. Her cheeks flushed pink as she softly asked back if he really found her adorable, secretly grateful that Kim Uisin was once again comforting her heart. Still the simple advice and delicate actions, he had always silently become her strongest pillar of support over all these years like a habit. Amidst the bustling streets, he invited her to come home to meet his mother, making Ri-yeon astonished at these unexpected developments. Everything had changed too quickly in a short span of a little over a month, leading her to the radiant first morning of the new year. Ri-yeon stepped down the stairs with an indescribably nervous mood, looking around for the first face she wanted to see on the first day of the year. She smiled brightly upon seeing Uisin waiting by the familiar car, the man she was preparing to introduce to her parents under the title of her husband. His gentle smile served as a firm affirmation that Kim Uisin was the true man who had always been by her side all this time. The two set off together to embark on the dramatic journey home to meet the family on the first day of the Lunar New Year, ready for new challenges ahead. The sound of the bowl of rice cake soup being set down firmly on the table officially kicked off the important meeting that would determine their future. Uisin's mother indignantly slammed the dish down on the table, prompting his father to speak up and remind her out of fear that the soup would splatter out. The atmosphere in the mansion became stifling when the father coldly announced that their son would not be returning for the family meal today. The mother grew even more furious upon learning that Uisin was busy meeting his future wife's family and decisively wouldn't drop by home afterward, making her snap at her husband. She bluntly blamed his rigid attitude, believing that his refusal to give his blessing was what caused their only son to grow increasingly distant. The mother continuously defended Ri-yeon, emphasizing that she was a polite, sensible girl who had even graduated from the same prestigious university as their son. She questioned her husband as to why a father wouldn't feel happy when a son, who was originally anti-marriage, finally agreed to bring a girlfriend home to meet them. The sound of chopsticks clattering hard against the table served as a protest. The father affirmed he was willing to give his blessing if he saw his son truly gaining happiness, but memories of the tense dinner returned, as he always believed that in business, relationships were everything, yet Uisin was overly protective of Ri-yeon to the point of not letting her meet anyone. The father expressed calculated concern when his son refused to bring his fiancé to high society parties out of fear that she would never fit in. Confronted with her husband's commercial impositions, the mother looked straight into his eyes and issued an absolute denial to protect her son's choice. Uisin's mother asked her husband to go get her some water because she felt her throat was parched after pouring out a long rant to defend her daughter-in-law. Looking at her husband's expression, she pressed to ask if he would bless the young couple if those concerns about the girl's integration were properly resolved. Uisin's father cleared his throat softly to hide his embarrassment, finally agreeing to admit reluctantly that in reality, the girl wasn't terribly hopeless. The mother touched her chin lightly, with a meaningful look, secretly thinking that her husband's long-standing firmness was finally beginning to waver after all. The suffocating atmosphere vanished when the father impatiently reminded her about the glass of water, making her laugh and happily step into the luxurious kitchen to please him. Ri-yeon let out a soft sigh and pressed the doorbell, officially beginning the arduous journey of meeting the parents. Uisin stood beside her looking extremely restless, confessing that his heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst, prompting her to press him about his anxiety. Flashing a reassuring smile, Ri-yeon advised her best friend to take his time to calm down and just let her know whenever he was truly mentally prepared. Her eyes were filled with trust as she gently promised that they would go inside together to face whatever was waiting for them. As the door opened slightly, her mother in a floral apron rushed out to greet them, having heard the endless chatter right outside the foyer. Uisin immediately bowed deeply in respectful greeting while loudly introducing himself, leaving the mother surprised by his politeness. Despite trying to maintain a polite exterior, his flushed cheeks and the beads of sweat trickling down betrayed the young master's intense nervousness. The mother smiled warmly to welcome them both, enthusiastically inviting them inside to wash their hands and get ready to enjoy the sumptuous dinner that was set. Ri-yeon gently cherished the stuffed animal keychain in her palm, a small gift that carried his deep care for her. Deep down, she was moved to realize that Uisin's simple words and thoughtful actions had once again comforted her heart after so many incidents. The New Year meal ended delightfully with everyone satisfied and praising the mother's skillful cooking. Ri-yeon quickly started tidying up and called out to her younger brother Jinriyeon, demanding that he bring all the dirty dishes to the sink immediately. Rian groaned and complained about his upcoming exams, prompting Uisin to try to step in and help, but he was instantly stopped by Rian's firmness. She shouted at her younger brother to get moving right away, leaving Rian with no choice but to walk away huffily, inwardly grumbling that his sister was a total tyrant. Witnessing the lively scene, Uisin looked around in confusion and quietly resolved to find an opportunity to score points with his girlfriend's family. His gaze suddenly landed on a pair of pink rubber gloves, the perfect tool for him to execute his plan to help with the chores. The steady sound of flowing water rang out in the sink as the young master meticulously began cleaning the dirty dishes. Rian's mother hurriedly rushed over to stop him, believing an honored guest shouldn't be doing such work, but he cheerfully replied that it was no trouble at all. He tilted his head slightly and sincerely explained that cleaning was actually a hobby that helped him relieve stress whenever he had free time. Faced with such unexpected thoughtfulness and efficiency, the mother looked at Uisin with affection, secretly marveling at what a perfect son-in-law he was. Rian's mother apologetically excused herself to Uisin, mentioning how clumsy her daughter was in the kitchen, making the girl cry out in dismay from afar at being exposed by her mother. Even though Rian insisted on doing it herself, the two ended up standing by the sink together to tackle the mountain of dirty dishes after the feast. Sitting in the living room, her mother didn't forget to remind her daughter not to break any dishes, prompting Rian to state loudly that she wouldn't let that happen. Sipping her tea with a subtle smile, the mother asked Uisin if Rian often caused clumsy accidents, leaving him stammering as he tried to cover for her. Uisin chuckled and teased that her own mother was the one exposing her horrible homemaking skills, making Rian glare at him in disbelief. She huffed and argued back that she had been living independently for over 10 years, so these chores were a piece of cake, but suddenly froze when he unexpectedly stepped closer. Ignoring her bewildered look, Uisin gently raised Rian's face with his hand and softly told her to stay still because there was a bit of soap suds on her cheek. In that moment, his gaze suddenly grew deep and remarkably focused, as if mesmerized by the features of the girl in front of him. His fingers softly brushed across her soft skin to wipe away the soap, accompanied by a warm declaration that it was all done, making the atmosphere instantly thicken. Rian stood frozen in place with bright red cheeks, hurriedly clutching the bowl to her chest and stammeringly chiding him for his overly intimate gesture that made her heart leap. Still shaken from the intimate moment, Rian bit her lips slightly and asked Uisin not to come close so suddenly because it made her heart race. After the two worked together to clear the pile of dishes, the sink was now sparkling clean as a testament to their seamless teamwork. Seeing that Uisin looked exhausted, Rian smiled brightly and suggested he go to her room to lie down and rest a bit to regain his energy after the long trip. A rough hand unexpectedly grabbed Uisin's shirt hem tightly from behind, stopping him from taking another step toward his beloved's invitation. Uisin turned around with a shocked expression, breaking into a cold sweat as if sensing an invisible aura of hostility surrounding him. The sudden appearance of Rian's father in the kitchen left both of them stunned, while he just chuckled heartily and questioned the young man's identity. He solemnly brought out a glittering box containing fine liquor, proudly announcing it was a cherished bottle reserved specifically for the day he welcomed his future son-in-law. Despite his daughter's bewildered expression, the father enthusiastically invited Uisin to share a glass, leaving the young man with no choice but to politely comply. Seeing her boyfriend constantly spun around by her father, Rian loudly urged him to let Uisin rest, but Uisin eagerly maintained that he was doing just fine. Rian closed her eyes and sighed apologetically, thinking to herself how terrible she felt for letting Uisin work so hard without a break ever since he arrived. The expensive bottle of strong liquor was placed neatly beside a lavish plate of appetizers, officially kicking off the dramatic drinking battle between the two men. The future father-in-law and son-in-law drank toast after toast until both began feeling lightheaded, staggering across the room. Uisin stumbled while covering his mouth, asking for permission to go outside for fresh air, while the father laughed triumphantly and claimed victory in front of his helpless wife. Amidst the quiet night enveloping the apartment complex, anxious urges telling him to get up, take a shower, and rest early echoed with concern. Uisin let out a soft sigh and slumped down onto the cold asphalt curb, his dim eyes cloudy from the alcohol as he tried to pull himself together. Suddenly, The rapid sound of Jinriyeon's footsteps approached from behind as he walked up to his future brother-in-law sitting alone in a daze. The younger brother-in-law looked deeply into Uisin's flushed face and bluntly asked him about his secret smoking habit. Uisin gripped the e-cigarette device tightly in his hand as Riyeon warned him that his older sister absolutely loathed the smell of smoke. Riyeon stared at him and pressed whether his sister knew about his secret smoking, making the tension in the air suddenly soar. The younger brother shrugged in surprise and revealed that Riyeon always complained grumpily about the smell of smoke, even when he only used e-cigarettes. Riyeon had once sternly warned her younger brother that the smell of e-cigarettes was also extremely unpleasant, making the boy click his tongue and admit that his sister was incredibly sensitive to such scents. Suddenly, the younger brother turned to call him brother-in-law, his probing gaze locked onto Uisin, making him freeze at the sudden serious attitude. Without holding back, the boy asked bluntly how much Uisin truly loved his sister and whether that affection was sincere enough for a lifelong commitment. Uisin blushed in embarrassment and stammered that he liked Riyeon very much, which was why they decided to get married. Seeing such genuine awkwardness, the younger brother immediately advised that he should consider quitting smoking right now if he wanted to live together long-term. He further explained that because Riyeon loved him so much, she hadn't complained, but in truth, she utterly despised the smell of smoke, even from e-cigarettes. Not stopping there, the boy enthusiastically listed how clumsy his sister was with cooking or housework, while asking him to be patient with her habit of sleeping in. After listing a long array of traits, the younger brother realized he might have been a bit too overbearing and quickly apologized for acting bossy, but Uisin just shook his head and assured him it was fine. His gaze suddenly turned intensely determined as he earnestly asked the younger brother to keep telling him all of Riyeon's secrets and preferences, no matter how small. Staring at his phone with a resolute face, Uisin affirmed that he would memorize everything he just heard so he could take care of the woman he loved to the fullest. The younger brother chuckled with amusement, thinking to himself that his future brother-in-law was much more interesting than he had expected. In the quiet atmosphere of the late night, the boy began revealing that once Riyeon fell asleep, nothing on earth could wake her, and she would even turn violent if disturbed while working. Riyeon walked into the living room with a bewildered face, secretly wondering why the space felt so empty, with Uisin nowhere to be seen. She hurriedly asked her mother about the two men's whereabouts, only to learn that her father had gone to shower, while Uisin was outside catching some fresh air to sober up. Seeing her daughter looking exhausted, the mother didn't forget to tease her about her low alcohol tolerance, noting how she had passed out after just one sip, leaving Riyeon smiling awkwardly. Memories of 2 hours prior flooded back terrifyingly, when Riyeon had turned pale as a ghost, clutching her stomach and groaning from the pressure of her father's strong liquor. Right then, Uisin's warm hand was placed on her shoulder like a saving grace, advising her to go inside and rest first, so he could face the battle alone. He looked at her with reassuring eyes, promising he would entertain her father properly and go rest right after the drinking session ended. With absolute confidence, Uisin proactively invited his future father-in-law to continue the fun with just the two men, making the old man chuckle delightfully and agree right away. Returning to the present, Riyeon sighed remorsefully, blaming herself for not staying by his side when she knew full well that Uisin didn't even care for alcohol. Riyeon lay curled up on the bed in a state of exhaustion, thinking that although she really wanted to go out and help Uisin, her severe stomach ache prevented her from moving. Just then, a gentle hand extended a warm glass of tea with a soft aroma, advising her to drink it all to soothe the discomfort. It turned out her mother had thoughtfully prepared a glass of honey water, reminding her daughter to drink it and lie down so she could turn off the lights outside for quietness. While busying herself in the small kitchen, the mother suddenly looked into space thoughtfully, as if reevaluating everything that had just transpired. She softly commented that Uisin was truly a very decent and respectable young man, far better than the guy her daughter had brought home before. Hearing her mother mention her ex with such distaste, Riyeon couldn't help but ask in surprise if her mother really remembered him so clearly. The mother sighed as she recalled the dinner years ago, asserting that the ex had a completely different vibe, full of calculation compared to Uisin's sincerity. As she worked, she confessed feeling immense relief, because back then she was so worried she had considered stepping in to stop her daughter from marrying that guy. Even as Ri-yun tried to defend him by saying he used to be very dutiful to his own mother, the mother firmly insisted that someone who didn't treat her well was not worthy of being with her. Looking into her daughter's astonished eyes, the mother asked back whether she truly forgot all the hurt she had suffered. Ri-yun's mother began recounting the story of that obnoxious ex-boyfriend who had nonchalantly ordered her daughter to get him water right in front of her, claiming guests shouldn't have to serve themselves. Back then, Ri-yun could only silently obey, breaking her mother's heart as she watched her daughter treated more like a maid than a fiancé. She concluded that small actions like that were enough to see through a person's nature, maintaining that he was never the right fit for her life. Her eyes turned reflective as she remembered her past anxieties, silently thankful that her daughter had finally escaped that selfish man. Bringing it back to the present, the mother couldn't hide her satisfaction as she stated that Uisin was the most ideal husband because of his sterling character, the core foundation of a happy family. Right on cue, Uisin brought over a glass of water, politely praising her culinary skills and sharing that his stomach felt much better after drinking the warm honey water. Mid-conversation, the mother suddenly remembered a tricky problem regarding Ri-yun's single bed, curiously asking how the young couple planned to arrange their sleeping setup. At the teasing question of whether they planned to squeeze together, Ri-yun's face flushed crimson as she frantically suggested sleeping in her mother's room to save face. Her mother immediately refused, not wanting her husband to sleep on the sofa, while also shooting down her idea of sleeping in the living room out of concern that her daughter would get a backache and feel uncomfortable. In the end, the mother looked at Ri-yun with a puzzled expression, asking point-blank why an engaged couple would be so shy that they wouldn't even sleep in the same room. Ri-yun's mother added a line full of suspicion, stating that anyone looking at the two of them right now would think this was a fraudulent marriage. Faced with her unreasonable accusation, the young couple stood stunned and had no choice but to reluctantly accept sharing the small room. Even though Ri-yun offered the bed, Uisin firmly laid out a sleeping pad on the floor, softly wishing her good night before quickly falling silent. Ri-yun lay on the bed with a heart full of guilt, blaming herself for letting a guest like him endure so much hardship ever since coming here. She stared silently into the dark void, feeling that she owed him immensely for all the effort he had quietly put in to help her. Suddenly, her mother's advice about him being the man who would walk beside her for the rest of her life echoed hauntingly in her mind. The phrase lifelong partner caused Ri-yun a brief moment of fluster as she subtly shifted to look at the figure of the man lying beside her. Meanwhile, despite having his eyes closed, Uisin was still tossing over the one-year marriage contract they had agreed upon beforehand. Ri-yun quietly observed him in the late night, inwardly amazed that her usually strict mother had taken a liking to him almost instantly. She softly leaned closer to look at his face, wondering what kind of magic he had used to win over her mother's heart so quickly. Uisin suddenly spoke up, asking if Ri-yun was tossing and turning unable to sleep, startling her in the darkness. Flustered while trying to turn over, Ri-yun accidentally caught her foot on the blanket and fell headlong onto Uisin, creating a hilarious yet awkward situation right on the floor mat. The extreme proximity caused both of them to flush bright red. Ri-yun could only stammer out apologies while her heart pounded relentlessly over the unintended mishap. She frantically explained that her foot had gotten caught in the blanket, while Uisin remained calm, telling her to hold onto his shoulders to steady herself as she sat up. Uisin attentively offered a supporting hand while Ri-yun was too embarrassed to raise her head, continuously muttering repentant apologies. After separating and returning to their positions, the two could only lie with their backs turned, softly wishing each other good night, but Ri-yun's mind couldn't stop screaming from embarrassment as she wondered how she could possibly fall asleep after this. Time slowly ticked away with the clock hand in the quiet space, yet the stifling awkwardness still hung over the small room. Uisin let out a heavy, quiet sigh. Despite trying to calm down, the turbulence in his heart just wouldn't settle. He lay motionless with wide eyes staring at the ceiling, clearly feeling his heart racing rapidly in his chest from the lingering aftermath of the fall. Unable to endure it any longer, Uisin had no choice but to sit up in the middle of the night, utterly dazed as his mind scrambled over the strange new emotions taking root. Uisin sat in a daze looking at Ri-yun sleeping soundly, silently complaining that she could sleep like a baby right after sending his heart into overdrive. He quietly gazed at her delicate face in the dark, telling himself that it was precisely because of her carefree nature that he couldn't sleep a wink. His face suddenly flushed as unfamiliar emotions continuously engulfed him, preventing him from maintaining his usual composure. Memories of the fall suddenly came flooding back, the vision of Ri-yeon nestled in his arms with flustered eyes causing his breathing to quicken abruptly. Noticing that Ri-yeon was only wearing thin clothing in the chilly weather, Uisin attentively pulled up the blanket over her to ensure she wouldn't catch a cold. Just as he leaned close, Ri-yeon let out a soft sleep-talking mumble, leaving him momentarily frozen. Unexpectedly, her small hand reached out and firmly grasped his wrist, as if seeking warmth in her dream. That sudden touch made Uisin's eyes widen in utter shock, as the heat from her hand transmitted to him, completely paralyzing his mind. Ri-yeon gently pulled his hand closer and snuggled her face into it out of habit, her lips continuing to mumble senseless sounds. In the quiet room, Uisin softly lowered his head, letting his breath mingle with her deep slumber, secretly wishing that this sweet moment could freeze forever. Uisin softly closed his eyes with a flushed face, muttering to himself that he was truly doomed now that his heart had started skipping beats for his best friend. He sat dazed watching Ri-yeon sleep soundly like a child, inwardly lamenting that with this ironic situation, he definitely wouldn't be able to catch any sleep tonight. The next morning, Uisin appeared with a worn-out face and prominent dark circles under his eyes, proof of a long, sleepless night spent fighting an internal battle. The moment she saw him, Ri-yeon's mother gasped in astonishment because he looked gaunt like a ghost, making her worry about her future son-in-law's health. She attentively scooped another bowl of hot hangover soup, repeatedly urging him to eat plenty to regain his strength after what seemed like an overly exhausting night. On the other side of the dining table, her father held his stomach groaning in pain, causing the mother to nag him about consuming too much heavy alcohol last night. Suddenly, her father turned to ask Ri-yeon if the ceremony was still taking place on the date she had mentioned before. Seeing his daughter look dazed while chewing her food, he quickly clarified that he wanted to confirm the exact date for their wedding. The sudden question left Ri-yeon speechlessly frozen, only able to stammer out an incomplete response while her mind tangled in a knot trying to figure out how to lie smoothly. Afterward, the two had to sit down at a coffee shop to seriously deliberate, scratching their heads to find a way to navigate this fake big day before getting exposed. Uisin looked at Ri-yeon with a serious expression, softly asking what she genuinely thought about holding an official wedding ceremony for the two of them. Ri-yeon, who was holding a pen to write, suddenly paused, analyzing that since they were going to get divorced anyway, it was best not to hold an expensive, lavish party. In the quiet atmosphere of the coffee shop, Uisin rested his hand on his chin in deep thought, seemingly weighing the risks and benefits of his best friend's proposal. Not wanting to prolong the hesitation, Ri-yeon decisively stated that they should skip the tedious wedding planning phase to focus on their main objective. Uisin then proposed an idea where they would tactfully tell their parents that the costs were too expensive and they wished to use that money for more important life priorities. He turned to ask for Ri-yeon's opinion with an expectant look, hoping this plan would gain total agreement from his fiancé. As expected, Ri-yeon's eyes lit up with excitement, and she smiled radiantly, agreeing immediately because she felt it was a flawless plan. Wasting no time, she quickly leaned down and meticulously recorded this clause into her notebook, treating it as an essential part of their contract. Returning to the dining table with the family, Ri-yeon tried to act natural while chewing her food, laughingly saying that a large-scale wedding would unnecessarily consume too much money. Her mother couldn't help but be taken aback, reminding her how she used to enthusiastically search. A tense, uncomfortable silence fills the room as her family looks on, sensing that something isn't quite right. The mother's eyes narrow slightly as she observes the couple, her disapproval palpable. Uisin suddenly starts choking on his food from the stress, while Ri-yeon panics and loudly insists that skipping the wedding was entirely her suggestion. Ri-yeon closes her eyes, her face a mask of frustration as she deals with her daughter's confusing behavior. Finally, she asks a pointed question about Uisin's parents' opinion, reminding Ri-yeon that she was supposed to have visited them already. Ri-yeon can only offer a weak, sweating response. The clattering sound of chairs rang out before either of them could even open their mouths to confess their plan to cancel the wedding to the family. Just at this moment, her father suddenly clutched his stomach and stood up to leave the dining table due to severe stomach pain, leaving Ri-yeon and Uisin watching him with worried expressions. The atmosphere suddenly grew tense as her mother unexpectedly spoke up, firmly asserting that her daughter must hold a formal ceremony. With a stern face, she declared that although she might be old-fashioned, the wedding was the non-negotiable bottom line. She suddenly turned to place her hopes on Uisin, demanding that he, as the groom, find every way possible to persuade her stubborn daughter. The threat to oppose the marriage if there was no wedding left Ri-yeon stunned, secretly regretting having severely underestimated her mother's resolve. The deep blue sky above the house seemed unable to soothe the emerging chaos in the young couple's hearts after the turbulent meeting with her parents. In the quiet small room, old boxes lay scattered across the floor, revealing yearbooks carrying memories of student days. Curious hands gently turned each page that had begun to take on the color of time, creating soft rustling sounds in the quiet space. Uisin sat in a daze looking at the old photos, secretly marveling that back in his day, notebooks like these would certainly be filled with home addresses and contact phone numbers. Uisin's mother sat dazed amid the pile of old yearbooks in the attic, silently confirming that her son and that girl had never attended the same school. The housekeeper quietly appeared with a puzzled expression, hurriedly asking why the mistress was taking matters into her own hands in such a dusty place. Noticing her mistress's confusion, the helper quickly offered a hand to search for the remaining clues from the past. On the phone screen, Jinriyeon's personal page under her title as a composer unexpectedly popped up, causing the housekeeper to cheer triumphantly that she had found the target. The mother couldn't help but be amazed by the helper's incredible searching skills, secretly admiring how a unique name could expose every secret. The housekeeper enthusiastically suggested sending a private message or an email to reach out, opening up a bold new direction of investigation for her mistress. The mother's face suddenly went blank because she was completely clueless about technology, asking bewilderedly what on earth this so-called private messaging magic was. Inside the luxurious mansion, the two women pondered together, silently anticipating the variables that might occur if they executed this approach. Outside, apartment buildings rose prominently under the pale sky, as if witnessing the secret plot starting to set in motion. At the same time at Ri-yeon's home, her mother urged the young couple to wait patiently for her father to finish showering to say goodbye, officially wrapping up a day of meeting the parents full of suspicion. The mother decisively walked quickly toward her daughter's room, as if she still couldn't give up on persuading her to have a formal wedding ceremony. Standing in front of her mother, Ri-yeon remained silent with a thoughtful expression, secretly feeling heavy pressure facing such immense expectations from her family. The clicking sound from the doorknob echoed, pulling along Ri-yeon's troubled thoughts about an official wedding that was never part of the original plan. The mother quickly grabbed Ri-yeon's arm tightly and earnestly asked if financial difficulties were making her hesitate, asserting that she would step in to fully support them. Faced with such overwhelming enthusiasm, Ri-yeon could only force an awkward smile and wave her hands to assure her money wasn't the issue, while trying to dodge the sensitive topic. The mother's expression suddenly turned deeply sad and hurt, as she softly asked whether her daughter truly believed she was intentionally being difficult. In her mind, a wedding was not just a formality, but a public declaration to protect honor and prevent any future acts of betrayal. Ri-yeon stubbornly maintained that trust between two people was enough, but her mother instantly squeezed her hand and snapped back with skepticism toward that overconfidence. Her mother's eyes welled with tearful pleading, earnestly wishing her daughter would hold even the smallest ceremony so she could entrust her to Uisin with complete peace of mind. Ri-yeon softly uttered a hesitant low sigh, staring into space with a contemplative look as her internal resolve began to waver before her mother's desperate pleas. Ri-yeon sat on the sofa deeply troubled, thinking that if they were to actually hold an official wedding, they would at least have to invite all the relatives from both sides. However, because this was merely a fake marriage contract, she understood that letting too many people know about this reality was completely ill-advised. Her gaze suddenly grew distant as she pondered the hypothetical scenario of what would happen if Uisin accidentally fell in love with someone else during their 1 year together. While lost in her vague calculations, Rian suddenly flinched as she felt the weight of Uisin's head resting gently on her shoulder. Looking at him sleeping soundly and peacefully, she could only widen her eyes in surprise.